Thank you very much, Chairman, members of the board, shareholders, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Thomas Kesselring, and I am also a member of Actares, and I'm speaking on behalf of Actares this morning. Unfortunately, I have to come back to the credit scandal in Mozambique. I already talked about this and asked some questions last year at the AGM, but my questions haven't been answered properly. An international audit report has now become available, and that raises even more questions. And those are questions I want to ask today on the basis of that audit report. You will recall that in 2013-14, Credit Suisse London and the Russian bank VTB London provided credit for more $200 million to Mozambique, officially for the expansion of a tuna fishing fleet, but in fact went to a military project for the Coast Guard. Several Mozambique front companies were put up, behind which were this Mozambique Secret Service. Now, it was a rather bizarre matter. The money was not transferred into the target country, but in fact to a Franco-Lebanese company, which was said to provide high-speed vessels for Mozambique. Now, only 18 million, so less than 1% of the total amount of credit, actually went to the credit partners in Mozambique for the build-up of that fleet. Now, the vessels that were sold were massively overpriced, were not even seaworthy in many cases, and at least a quarter of the total sum of credit has vanished without a trace. It's possible that some of it was used to buy weapons. Mozambique was in an armed conflict at the time, a conflict which caused thousands of people to flee the country and run to neighbouring countries. Now, this has, of course, cost an enormous amount of money, which has now landed in Mozambique's debt account. The lead for this project lay with you, Mr. Rauner, with Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse attached 3 conditions to the project. You required the Mozambique National Bank to approve the credit. You required oversight of the project, and you required that the IMF be informed. And yet none of these 3 conditions was fulfilled. And even despite this not being fulfilled, the credit was still granted and was in fact kept secret from those bodies that should have known about it. Why was that? You also required a state guarantee to secure the money that came, and yet it should have been approved by the Mozambique Parliament according to Mozambique's constitution, and that did not happen. So in fact what you did also ran counter to the constitution. When this scandal became known 2 years ago, the IWF and other donor countries cut off their funding to Mozambique. Their funding would only be reinstated when the country had cleared up the scandal. And shortly after that, Mozambique declared bankruptcy. The IMF investigated last year, but the investigation had to be extended 3 times over. Allow me to briefly quote here. A literary quote. If the thief has trouble, then everybody else will as well. Now, I know that Credit Suisse has done everything it can to ensure that it doesn't fall down, that you don't get tripped up by this. As we've heard, what you've done is respond to everything with a stony silence. There's been no cooperation with the audit company. Nobody knows what has happened to most of the money and why the vessels sold were so incredibly overpriced. Rumours that weapons were purchased are still on the table. The questions remain unanswered. And therefore, funding to Mozambique, aid to Mozambique is still being cut. Mozambique is the 9th poorest country in the world. The population is suffering. Schools, hospitals are without supplies and equipment. 4 times fewer teachers were hired this year than in previous years. The economic damage caused by this scandal has put the country back many years in its development. If Credit Suisse had ensured or had helped the companies concerned, Kroll in particular, that had to produce the audit report, if Credit Suisse had assisted properly, then things might have been different. But you withheld the information. When the audit summary was published, then Credit Suisse complained to Kroll that the figures provided were, in fact, too high. It would appear that you didn't even give Kroll the necessary data so that they could produce their report properly. Mr. Rohrer, Mr. Thiam, have you never wondered whether your silence or your secrecy is a good strategy? Are you more afraid of light than you are of darkness? You have shown incredible disregard for the government of Mozambique. What will this do to your reputation? You've been heavily criticised by the audit company. You've been actively involved in what's gone on here, and you knew that the conditions you attached to the credit were not fulfilled, and yet you still went ahead with your game of hide and seek. What does this do to your reputation? Allow me to ask you some burning questions. First of all, why did Credit Suisse decide to approve this business in the first place? Secondly, did Credit Suisse cooperate with Kroll in its investigation, and if so, to what extent? Thirdly, and I think this is most interesting to our shareholders, what are the provisions involved in dealing with the damages suffered here? Fourthly, what do you intend to do to compensate the population of Mozambique? Question 5. You've talked about credit and confidence. Does this really reflect what you're actually doing? And finally, a final question, once again to quote Wilhelm Busch. If you are not careful, you may end up in the dock, to paraphrase. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Reality doesn't reflect the caricature that you've come up with here. We are certainly not engaging in any loan pushing, as you have suggested. We have very clear rules and regulations, and we certainly do comply with our due diligence obligations when checking out our business. We would not do anything that we didn't think was acceptable, and we certainly work hard with the competent authorities. Now, because investigations are ongoing, we won't be able to go into detail on some of your questions, but it's certainly clear that much of what has been said, particularly about the Kroll report, is incorrect. Now, as to putting things right in Mozambique, the government of Mozambique has come up with some proposals. Credit Suisse has always said that we are open to suggestions as to what we can do to help. We have the principle of saying that if things go wrong, we do our best to put them right, but we need to be careful in acting too quickly before it's really been established what's happened. Now, Mr. Chuti, our General Counsel, might want to say something about the accusation that we didn't work properly together with Kroll. And as to the provisions, you can look at the annual report.
Mr. Kesselring, we did cooperate with Kroll and with the supervisory authorities investigating this case. We've made available a substantial amount of material to them. At this time, we cannot talk about the details, unfortunately, but as you said, rightly so, other parties did not cooperate with Kroll, and this is why a number of questions are still unanswered. We do hope that there will be a clarification soon and that we will have a clear picture then. As far as provisions are concerned, I'd like to refer to our annual report. They are disclosed as a grand total and not separately. Thank you.